Hello, everyone. Hi there. Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor, clinically certified domestic violence counselor, clinically certified trauma professional level 2 now. Also, the creator of SNAP, Survivors of Narcissistic and Abusive Personalities, and the owner of Claremont Mental Health. Today, I want to talk about a topic that touches the lives of many of my clients. So often people come to see me and it's related to an intimate partner scenario where they're experiencing or have experienced narcissistic abuse in an intimate partner relationship. And it's very common that many survivors and targets of abuse, not all, but many, come from a background where they were raised or were exposed to an environment where abuse or toxic behaviors were common and normal. In other words, you were raised with a toolbox that allows you to exist and navigate abusive and toxic scenarios and environments and people. So often you will have a support system of family and friends sometimes that maybe they're not the healthiest. Raise your hand. I know I can easily think of 5 people just right off the top of my head, people that I work with that I'm like, yep, that person, that person, that person, where they're trying to get out of an abusive circumstance and they need to rely on other people. And the people that they have to rely on maybe aren't the healthiest. So I wanted to talk about that today. I got a whole list of things to go over here. So let's get started. So this can happen during the abuse itself, where you're being abused in an intimate partner relationship and you reach out to friends or family while that's going on. And, maybe you disclose what's happening. And you'll notice that it feels like that they might be siding with the abuser. They're going to say the typical things like, well, your father and I didn't exactly get along, but we stayed together, or, well, marriage takes work, or relationships are work, or have you tried counseling, or, maybe making it seem like that it could be your fault that it's happening. Another one would be that they will assume this myth, and I don't think uh, it's not that they hear it from other places and have accepted the myth, but more so it's a myth that is created within a toxic systemic situation. In other words, family, a group, or group of friends, that they're going to have ways that they make abuse okay and make toxic behaviors okay. So they might have an attitude like, well, it takes two, that any high conflict or high drama moments are somehow of your own making, that characterizes your participation as being something like, well, you must like it. But what they're doing in that moment is not only are they, not really supporting you or understanding you or hearing you, but really what they're doing is they're protecting their own ways of being. They're protecting their own methods and patterns and strategies that they use in their relationships, right? So we can't call, okay, let me just make this a little clearer. So if you're in an abusive relationship and the things that are going on in that relationship kind of look like what you grew up with, then you go to the people you grew up with and are complaining about that behavior. They're not going to call it out and say, that's wrong. That shouldn't be happening. That's not okay. You should set boundaries or get away from that person, or you shouldn't let people treat you that way. They're not going to say that. They're going to say, well, it wasn't a big deal when you were doing it to me when we were teenagers. Like they're going to make it seem like that it's actually acceptable behavior because they have to. If they say that the behavior is wrong in that circumstance, then wouldn't that mean that the behavior would be wrong if they were doing that too, right? So you'll find that you just don't feel affirmed. They can't really have your back or be in your shoes, because if they do, then they call attention to their own toxic behaviors. Okay. Now, let's move on to after the abuse. So this is when excuse me, when you leave or you're trying to get away or it's you're on the other side of it and you're trying to heal, you're trying to rebuild, you're going to need some help. Now, in general, recovery is a solitary journey. And what I mean by that is that you do it for yourself and you do it by yourself and you're motivated from within and you step out in this sort of scary way, a leap of faith on your own and start trying new things and listening to other people and wanting to change that generational pattern. So as you start to do that, when you when you start to look for help, you're going to have to lean on people that may be the origin story of how you got here in the first place. So even though it's a solitary journey, we're doing it for us. We're motivated from within. And I think another point of the idea of recovery being solitary, it doesn't mean that you don't have professionals or peers in recovery that help you. It's that what you're doing, the actions you're taking, the whole point, the goals of what you're doing comes from you. And also, you're not going to get closure. You're not going to get a shared understanding or an apology from abusers, right? So when I say it's solitary, I mean that you can't reach out to the people that hurt you and think that they're going to somehow understand what you're doing and help you through it, right? So solitary just meaning that you are on your own as like the motor of the boat, but you're not on your own in the sense that wherever you can find resources or help, we should do that. But those things cannot be the driving force of our recovery. Okay, so we know we need help, but we also know we're on our own. And when you reach out to people that are actually toxic, sometimes you know this and sometimes you don't. Because when you're starting off your recovery, you start to learn things and you're like, oh my gosh, my whole life. Wait, this friend, that church, this group, my family, my first marriage, like you start thinking about a lot of other situations that you've been in. And you're like, oh my gosh, this applies here too. So you might even know as you're asking for help that the people you're asking for help from kind of aren't really on your team, not fully, but maybe you don't know that yet. And I experienced that with people too, that, they think that everything's fine in this department, but then when they start to really learn more and rely on these people more for this kind of intimate need and private need, things start to come up and they realize, okay, this has been in my life my whole life. So one thing that they do, when I say they, I mean the toxic support system. You need them, but they're not exactly super helpful or supportive in the ways that we would like, but they are supportive in a way that makes it somehow, we need them, right? We do. All right. So they will have unreasonable, unrealistic, and uninformed opinions. So they're going to tell you what they think about what you're doing without having any context of education or any valid experiences, because we know what their interpersonal lives are like. We know the way they navigate relationships and what their values are and what their priorities are, right? So when they dish out advice to you, most of which is unsolicited, they're going to say things that really aren't true in terms of what's healthy, what or standard practices be. An educated, informed opinion is not what you're going to hear there. But yet, don't forget that as they're helping you, you kind of feel like you owe them. And you might feel like, oh, they're still helping me, even though I'm a mess. Like you might think that the fact that they're there helping means that they genuinely want to help you. Okay, so you might get confused at first, thinking that they're there without other motivations. They're there from just like the kindness of their heart. but their views are skewed by the unresolved issues or past trauma in their own lives. So, like I was saying, anything they have to say to you about your circumstance is going to come from a kind of a sick place, something that hasn't been corrected or processed, right? You're the one that's making the generational change in the situation. They're not. And in fact, they kind of support and encourage the status quo. Help isn't exactly helpful. I mean, it is helpful, but it's also kind of the bare minimum. And it's also transactional. So here would be an example. So when I say that the help isn't exactly helpful, so what if, I'm going to use a scenario and change some of the information around so that we're not saying anything personal about anybody in particular. So this is a fictional story, but I'm pulling from experiences and things that I've heard. So let's say you're trying to get away from an abuser, you have a small child, you need a place to live, you've got to get out, you got to go. And a relative offers room in their home for you to stay with them. And they offer you even a job, perhaps where they work or at a business they own or something like this. You're like, oh, thank God, I didn't know where I was going to go. I thought I was going to have to go to shelter. And you're like, great, they're going to help. But then as you start to integrate into their sphere now, living in their home, relying on them, working with them, even maybe you're noticing that it's really not helpful because it's transactional. So here you are in need and in a vulnerable state, completely depleted, exhausted, drained, and just trying to get by, sometimes moment to moment, hour to hour, but definitely day to day, at least in the beginning. So the help that you would need needs to come without strings because you already have enough on your plate. You're already dealing with a lot. So when someone says, yeah, I'll help you, here, you can stay in my place. But I also, what we're going to need you to do is clean the house and watch our child when we are not around. So you're going to be our babysitter. Oh, and you're going to pay rent too. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be contributing and that there's like a balanced way to go about it. But in some situations, what winds up happening is you get exploited because you are the vulnerable person in the situation. You are in need. So they will take advantage of the fact that you need them, and they'll figure out ways that they can use that to their advantage. So it sounded great. Sure, I'll come. Thank you. Yeah, it's temporary. We'll just be there until I can get on my feet. And then an offer of even work, perhaps like paid work. It's like, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I won't let you down. But then you start doing the work and you're not really getting paid the way you're supposed to. The responsibilities aren't really clear. You're being criticized. You just feel like you're kind of giving a lot and they're taking a lot, but you feel somehow indebted and guilty, like that you owe them. It just winds up being something that isn't really helpful because you're having to do all these dances to get the help. And you're dealing with guilt. And from what I've experienced, those types don't really help you with that guilty feeling, like they kind of fan those flames of guilt. Okay, so the help is transactional. We know this. They are also really quick to judge and point the finger. So you're going to start being the center of attention. You're going to start being like the problem child, essentially. And then what that does is that takes the attention off of them and their bad behaviors and the things that they're not dealing with in their lives. So you get to look like the screw up and they get to feel superior. It feels like they don't actually want you to get better. Yeah, that's a weird moment when you're like, hold on, I thought you were helping. But then when I start to get better or do things that is the new me, like when I'm acting as my new self or trying something new, or meeting someone new or going to new places as part of the recovery, they kind of poo-poo that stuff. They say negative things about it. Oh, you don't want to go there. That's where people go that are, or are you sure it's a good idea that you're dating? Make you feel like that you're um, some kind of a slut or a whore because you choose to continue to try to date and have connection while also healing and recovering, and they judge you for that. I mean, there's lots of, yeah. Okay. Moving on. Here's a good one. They're jealous of you. They are. They're jealous of you. They're seeing you do the thing that they can't do. They're watching you break a generational pattern. They're watching you reject their worldview. They're watching you reject the way that they live their life, in a way. Like you're unlearning what they taught you, and you're learning the new healthy stuff, and you're headed to a really good place. Um, and for some reason, they don't like that. They want you to stay in that role that you're in, which is the one that we can point the finger at, and the one that can be the whipping post, and the problem child. That really takes the focus off of all their junk. So they get jealous when things start to go well. And then let's say, you're really on the other side of things, and you're fully living your new healthy life now. Your bubble that we talk about early on in recovery, that sacred bubble that you're building, the bubble extends and it becomes your life. And your life gets pretty good. Good things start to happen. Healthy people start to show up. New relationships start to form. And now you're getting to live the practices, live the new values, practice those new behaviors, and be in the healthy relationship that you've worked so hard to figure out, find, and then now figuring out how to navigate that. And they don't really want that for you. They really don't want you to do that, because then it takes away all their excuses as to why they can't get better and they can't make changes in their life the way you have. They refuse to face their own issues. So that's part of what I was just saying, like if they can keep making you the bad guy and pointing at you and saying how you're screwed up and all your poor choices, then they don't have to look at themselves so much. But they really like to have you around because you take the attention off of their deficits and the areas in which they lack. And they don't face their own issues. Remember, it's like, my daddy hit me and I turned out fine. Or, well, I was molested by my uncle and I turned out fine. You don't have to ruin our family about this. You're destroying the family. We've all been abused and none of us are acting like this. Yeah. So they don't want to face their own issues. And we know why. I mean, you're doing the work. You're watching this video. It's fucking hard. It's the hardest thing you will ever do. And not everyone is capable. Not everyone has what it takes. Not everyone has the situational resources or the character, whatever it is. Not everyone is going to make it out. And a lot of people wind up just perpetuating those generational cycles. So the healthier you get, the more toxic they become. And so I watch this happen through, the process of recovery of my clients. Is that like in the beginning, I'll be like, ding, 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 in my head, like, okay, well, family is on the agenda at some point. And then down the road, I'll see the client go, oh, and they'll have kind of a moment and go, I just realized that I've been surrounded by this my whole life. I just realized that I've never had a healthy relationship. I've never experienced unconditional positive regard. I've never experienced unconditional love. That's something I've never had. So as you get healthier, toxic things become less tolerable. Remember when you used to live in toxic? You didn't even notice. Now, one whiff of it, and you're like, nope. The poison becomes very prominent as you get healthier, you start to notice toxic things way sooner. So as they're helping you and supporting you, you get better and better, and then you start to see them clearer and clearer. They make you feel guilty. Now, guilt's a problem for us. We have a lot of guilt, and guilt comes from all the things that happen that we're ashamed of, and the things we participated in that we're ashamed of. We feel bad that we've inconvenienced other people or caused them pain or harm because of our toxic situations. We feel guilty about what our kids may be exposed to, and the kind of life that we've raised them in up until a point when we realized, okay, this isn't right. So there's lots of things that survivors of abuse feel guilty for, none of which they need to feel guilty for. Then you have abusers and manipulators around you that inflict guilt. And that's their whole goal, is to keep you feeling guilty. So if you're prone to feel guilty and you're surrounded by people that guilt you, guilt's a problem. And this is why we say in recovery that guilt is a red flag. Guilt is a red flag. You don't have any reason to be walking around feeling the amount of guilt that you feel. And if you are feeling guilty, here's what you can do with that. I'm feeling guilt. It's one of two things. One, I'm looking at this through an old, unhealthy lens, and I need to address that. Or number two, someone's actively manipulating you and trying to make you feel guilty. So because you feel guilty and indebted, you will kind of put up with a lot of the toxic behaviors. In fact, you'll blame yourself for them and try to figure out ways that you can fix things when really you're not the problem. They will talk down to you like you're a child, very patronizing. There's a way people ask you how you're doing, that they're just being nosy, or they want to impose upon you, let's not forget the roles here. You're the bad one, I'm the good one, or you're the sick one, and I'm not the fuck up, you are, right? So how are you doing? How are you doing? And it's like, I'm doing great. Thanks. Oh, okay. Well, it's just awful. I've heard and it seems like that they care, but really it's like they're just trying to get the juicy gossip out of you, or they want the update. And then that your information isn't private either. And we'll get to that in a second. So it feels icky. It doesn't feel encouraging when they ask, how are you? Or how are you doing? It feels more like they're, kind of looking down their nose at you. And they cannot handle the realities and the awkward stages of recovery. There's very black and white thinking going on here, but recovery is awkward and fluid. And there are moments that, while are ugly and horrific, are also really integrally, really important in your recovery. Some of the ugliest moments of recovery, when we fall on our face, when we make a bad choice, and we have to scrape ourselves up off the ground one more time, that's the work of it. That is essentially the work, is getting back up and keep going, keep going, and keep going, and not giving up. Well, in those phases and stages, you're going to do dumb shit. We're a mess, and we're trying to get better, and we're figuring out relationships and people and ourselves. And that requires experimentation and making mistakes and doing things that people may not understand. And your support system is going to judge the shit out of you for this. And they're going to mischaracterize what you're doing. they don't get the subtle nuances of this process. They don't know what's normal, what isn't normal. They just see that you're, acting in a way that makes it easy for them to point the finger at you. But many people in recovery aren't proud of all the things they've done in recovery. We're still learning, okay? And that's normal. That's fine. We don't need to feel guilty or bad about it. It's what happens when you're learning new things, is you have to get it wrong a few times. So they mischaracterize you and criticize you to make you feel bad about yourself, which, if we're helping and supporting, that doesn't really feel very helpful or supportive. And they're going to walk around telling other people your business. They are not going to protect your privacy. They're going to gossip about you. And that's their way of also controlling the narrative, especially since they're helping, right? So they can position themselves in the context that they present as the savior or the only one that's doing anything about it, and that you're not even appreciative of the help. And can you believe what she did? I did all this stuff for her, and then she couldn't even do this or that, right? So they'll paint themselves as like this martyr who's rescuing you, and that you're difficult or ungrateful, or you're not getting better, or, really it wasn't about that you were being abused. It's about that maybe you deserved it, or maybe you were the problem. And then this is my last one, and then we'll end. They want people to know that they are supporting you. And they will complain about it, acting benevolent about it, to receive praise from others, or to try to make themselves look like a good person, parent, friend, family member. So they're going to walk around, not keeping it to themselves. They're going to be very verbal. You're going to hear that they're saying things, other family members are going to come. And, this is when flying monkeys and vultures show up, is during your recovery. The flying monkeys, some of them seem like that they're helpful and that they care, but they're actually flying back to other toxic people and kind of weaponizing your recovery. It's kind of cruel, that you're in this vulnerable state and this is how people act. And then the vultures, which I have a video, so check it out. There's a video in my content here on YouTube that's called "Beware of Vultures." So there are people that show up while you're in recovery, while you're vulnerable, that will exploit and manipulate you while you're in that vulnerable state. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. This video is meant for people who have to rely on others during the recovery, and then those people they're relying on aren't really as healthy as we need people to be. By the time we're finished with this process, which, by the way, we're never finished, but by the time we get to our new life, our new healthy life, we're living the life now. Our relationships reflect our new values and our new ways of doing things. By the time that we get there, we notice these things, and it's really hard because you feel like you owe them and you care about them, the support system. But eventually that tolerance that we talked about lowers to the point where you have zero tolerance, and you'll find that you might need to make changes in who you expose yourself to and who you allow to have intimate access to you. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.